Welcome back to No Sleep Till on the Reier on YouTube channel. Travis Reier back with you following Wednesday's practice down at Miller Electric Center. The Jaguars back out on the natural playing surfaces after Hurricane Debbie worked through the area, the remnants anyway. And so what we had was a lot of cloud cover. We had a nice breeze. And I know as an observer, I appreciated it. So I can only imagine what it was like for the players to get through that workout and be treated to such ideal conditions here in early August. But a lot to get into on the show today. We'll have a few observations from Wednesday's practice, but what we'll do for the most part is kind of tie it in to this initial depth chart that we've seen issued by the Jaguars. Of course, the Kansas City Chiefs, the world champion once again, Kansas City effing Chiefs, coming to town on Saturday night. The Chiefs descend on Duval. We'll kind of tie in Wednesday's practice with what we saw on this depth chart. You heard Ryan Nielsen, the Jaguars defensive coordinator, earlier on Wednesday kind of poo-poo the depth chart. That's what coaches do. I covered Nick Saban for 17 years. No one in football despises a depth chart more than Nicholas Lou Saban. And so not a surprise to hear Ryan Nielsen use terms like sand to describe what this initial depth chart is drawn in. But we'll do it all the same because I do think in some of it, it does match up with what we've seen during these practices to date. So as far as Wednesday's practice goes, again, good health. That seemed to be maybe the biggest takeaway. And also that offensive line that we'll talk about with some injuries that those guys have had up front, how that looks after Wednesday's practice and how it sort of aligns with the depth chart. But as far as team drills after individual work on Wednesday, we saw some half field work, saw some really good coverage once again from these Jaguar defensive backs. Safety Andre Cisco early on against Evan Ingram. Darnell Savage had some really good coverage on Elijah Cooks, the wide receiver, on a deep corner route. Jarian Jones, the rookie from Florida State, really good coverage on wide receiver Tim Jones. And then you saw the offense rally. Mac Jones has really, in my opinion, had a very, very good preseason. And that continued on Wednesday. He had an absolute dime on a deep outcut to Brenton Strange, the tight end. Good day for the tight ends once again. That's been encouraging here during the first week or so preseason work to see these tight ends, it seems anyway, take another step, whether it's Luke Farrell or Brenton Strange. And then speaking of tight ends, Trevor Lawrence hit Josiah DeGuara for an easy touchdown on what looked to be a wheel concept. And maybe Jarian Jones got caught up in the mix a little bit. DeGuara ended up wide open. Trevor did what he needed to do in terms of putting the ball on his tight end. And then back again, the give and take that we talked about really since the pads have gone on for this team and what you want to see if you're a Jaguar fan. Trey Flowers, the 6'3" defensive back, nice pass breakup while working against Denzel Mims, the wide receiver. And then Buster Brown, cornerback who has been in the news in recent days after the hit on Gabe Davis that resulted in reportedly a pretty large brawl between the offense and the defense a couple of days ago. But Monteric Brown with a nice pass breakup against wide receiver Joseph Skates as well. And then the Jags moved into some 11-on-11 work Wednesday morning. And because Anton Harrison is still out and in that concussion protocol, you had Walker Little at right tackle with that first group. You had Blake Hance at left guard because Ezra Cleveland continues to sit out. But you did have Cam Robinson at left tackle. It was also good to see Cooper Hodges working his way back in following his injury early in camp, back in the mix. In fact, we saw Cooper Hodges in there at one of the guard spots with the ones late in practice. And I thought it was interesting too, because right from the outset of 11-on-11, you had tempo, you had hurry up from the Jaguar offense. And Trevor Lawrence with a really nice crossing route to Christian Kirk. You had Antonio Johnson, the safety, chasing on that play. And then defensively, It's been a little bit of news here in the last 24 hours or so because Adam Gotsis, a veteran defensive lineman, has been released by the Jags. And I think that raised a few eyebrows, probably came as a surprise to even Adam himself. I'm pretty sure of that in saying it. But you are developing depth, and you're feeling like, especially in these last couple of drafts, you've probably gotten it right with Tyler Lacey a year ago, and now Mason Smith and Jordan Jefferson, the two LSU players in this 2024 draft. Now, Jefferson has been banged up a little bit of late, but what we did see, and this is all considering, again, that Eric Armstead hasn't worked a snap yet in team drills or really anything. But you had Tyler Lacey and Mason Smith paired up together with the twos during the early stages of 11 on 11 with that defensive line. And then, you go to the second team offense, and I know there's been a little bit of this narrative that it's a battle between Mac Jones and CJ Beathard. And I'm not saying that it hasn't been a legit competition, but for me, kind of like the talk has been about Trevor since pads have gone on. I know there's been the extent of charting his throws, and it's been a very impressive stat line. I haven't done that with Mac, but I would be very interested to see what Mac Jones' stat line looks like since pads have gone on, because once again on Wednesday he looked very comfortable in that number 2 spot. It made me feel like he's the clear-cut number 2, and I've kind of felt that way for a few practices now. Not to say that there isn't legit competition with CJ Beathard, and I think, look, if you can figure out a way to keep all 3 of these guys, great. But if you can't, Mac Jones or CJ Beathard is going to be a backup for a NFL team, a number 2 in all likelihood for an NFL team in 2024. But Trevor, again, good, taking care of the football. I thought all 3 of the quarterbacks did a pretty good job of that on Wednesday. Trevor, where the separation comes in terms of skill set, is that he's dynamic in stretches. He had a deep ball to Brian Thomas Jr. that was a thing of beauty. Brian kind of had to re-catch it after a little bit of a bobble, but he was able to fight off Ronald Darby and finish the play. Trevor, again, pretty precise. He did have a throw where he had Joshua Cephas open deep, and I felt like Trevor was maybe a little bit late getting it out. But other than that, another strong day for the Jaguars starting quarterback. And again, middle of the field was good. Christian Kirk on crossing routes, Evan Ingram on crossing routes, Gabe Davis on slants, RPO action that you can work with Gabe Davis in the middle of the field, and under center work was good for the quarterbacks. I thought both Trevor and Mac off of play action, off of design movement, boot action, those type of things still seems to be a really good idea where these Jaguar quarterbacks are concerned. Now, so how does it all tie into the depth chart? Well, let's pull up that depth chart right now. We're going to bring it up on the screen. There you see it. There you see it. And we'll sort of work through it, and we'll start with the offense right there at the top. There you see the wide receiver situation. And something else we'll get into coming up here in just a little bit is the math. Now, this is stuff for down the road. We haven't even had a preseason game yet, but it does start to get you thinking about the 53 man at some point. But right here, as we start with the one wide receiver spot, Gabe Davis atop that spot. Elijah Cooks, I think, has had a nice camp. He's also a guy that can help you from a special teams perspective. Seth Williams and Joshua Cephas there, 3rd and 4th. Now, I think you could bracket a couple of those guys, if not all 3, if you really wanted to, in terms of competition. There are times where you watch Seth Williams and you think, boy, with his length and his explosive playability, this is a guy that should be on a 53-man in the NFL. Same thing for Cephas, who can also help you on special teams. If Seth has an issue in a competition with some of these guys that we're going to talk about, not just here, but again, when we go down and we look at the other wide receiver spots, Christian Kirk, slam dunk, Brian Thomas Jr., slam dunk. I think Parker Washington and Devin Duvernay can both make this team. I think both, in all likelihood, will. You kind of look at them, and in terms of physical attributes and skill sets, you go, well, they're kind of the same guy. They both can return kicks. But we've seen them use Washington and Duvernay in some sets together. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that that could very well happen. I think when you get into the Brevin Eastons, the Austin Trammels, Tim Jones, Denzel Mims, Joseph Skates, it's going to be tough for those guys. I go back to that top line with Cooks, Williams, and Cephas. That's where I'm kind of intrigued to see how it shakes out among those three guys. So then we look at the offensive line. And again, with Cam back in there at left tackle, you know what you pretty much got. There's been this expectation that perhaps there would be an evaluation of competition with Cam and Walker Little. And maybe that'll prove to be the case by the end of camp. But what we have seen throughout camp is Cam Robinson with the ones at left tackle. When Cam was out, we did see Cole Van Lanen at left tackle with the ones over the weekend. And then Ezra Cleveland there at the left guard position. He was out today once again. So Blake Hance, as we told you earlier, jumping in there. You certainly have a veteran in Tyler Shatley. But when you start thinking about 8 guys for these spots between left tackle, left guard, center, right guard, and right tackle, I think it's a good situation because I think you have very legitimate options that could make that a tough call at these offensive line spots. And then at center, Mitch Morse, of course, Luke Fortner, the previous starter, Brandon Scherf at right guard, Cooper Hodges, who we did see in there late with the ones on Wednesday. Anton Harrison, of course, slam dunk starter at right tackle when he's healthy. And then Javon Foster, the rookie from Missouri, we've seen with the 2. So again, if you look at this depth chart right now and you think, okay, this is the first 5, you still got to have at least 3 more guys. You would think 8. Walker Little, you would think is a slam dunk. Absolutely. I think Cooper Hodges is probably in pretty good shape. You drafted Javon Foster in 2024. I don't think I've seen anything that suggests that he won't be a part of this team. So, it starts getting interesting because, Fortner is valuable in that he is a backup center. But what you typically have is a swing guy. And that's where you look at Tyler Shatley and you think, well, I just don't know. He's aging out, getting long in the tooth. But Shatley can give you some of that. And I guess Fortner can swing to guard if he needs to. We haven't really seen it in preseason camp. But the math is going to get very interesting as we move through this, I think, for those final 2 or 3 spots on that offensive line. Again, back to the tight end position. Jags kept 3 on their initial 53-man a year ago. Evan Ingram, Luke Farrell, Brenton Strange were those 3. This probably ties in a little bit to how the numbers work at wide receiver because the Jags a year ago kept 7. Do they keep 7 again? Do they go with 6? That could play into, is it just 3 tight ends again to open the season like it was a year ago? Could it be 4? I think if there was a 4th that was really pushing you to kind of make that decision to keep him, and not just in terms of tight end value, but maybe where special teams are concerned as well, you would be more motivated to do that. Right now, as it sits, it just looks like 3 tight ends for me. The quarterback position we talked about earlier with Trevor, Mack, and CJ Beathard. I think Mack's arrival has upgraded that situation significantly. I think Mack maybe is viewed in some corners as kind of just clownish, because he dances, he brings some energy. But between all of that, I'm telling you, the guy has been exactly what the Jags could have hoped. He loves football, as we've heard from Press Taylor. He eats, sleeps, and drinks football. So unlike a year ago, when Trevor had his health issues and you weren't confident enough to go to your backup, if Mac Jones is the guy in 2024, I don't think that'll be an issue. Running back is very interesting. We're going to talk about a guy here that we've mentioned here and also on X/Twitter here in the last week or so. Travis Etienne, the guy, as the starter. Tank Bigsby, I think, has shown that he's ready to take another step. Then you get into Dearness Johnson. The Jags kept 4 backs on their initial 53 last year. And Keelan Robinson just physically hasn't been able to do as much as the coaching staff would like. Now, I think to Keelan's credit, even with a toe issue, he's tried his best to work through it. He's shown that he is willing to try to work through that type of injury, which is not good for any football player, but certainly at the running back position. But I think Jalen Jackson, the undrafted free agent rookie who we mentioned here, and then after Saturday's practice, I tweeted, I thought Jalen Jackson in the Saturday fan day practice caught it, ran it, and also did some nice things on special teams. So Jalen Jackson's going to be a guy that I think is going to make it tough to cut. Maybe at some point, if it comes right down to it and Keelan's good to go, he can practice squad a guy like Jalen Jackson, but very much we have been impressed by Jalen Jackson so far in this camp. Did some good things again on Wednesday. Took a toss sweep in the red zone, showed some nice burst, some decisiveness, and then on an inside run off the right side, he did some really good things as well. He's kind of continued. He's been consistent, Jalen Jackson, the undrafted rookie free agent. We talked about the wide receiver positions between Christian Kirk, Parker Washington, Brian Thomas Jr., Devin Duvernay. A little bit of concern maybe that you've got a lot of the same kind of guy when you talk about Christian Kirk and Parker Washington and Duvernay. But at the end of the day, all three of those guys have done some really good things in this preseason. I thought Parker, watching him today, route running, I think what you hope for Brian Thomas Jr. is that in a year's time, you see him become the kind of route runner that it looks like Parker Washington is becoming. Different guys, Brian Thomas, longer, taller, going to be a little bit more difficult for him to get in and out of breaks, probably as easy as it is for Parker Washington, but an encouraging group to say the least. And what you're seeing is a comfort level, I think, not just with Trevor, but also Mac. It took a few practices. It took a little bit. But these guys are very much in tune right now in terms of kind of what they expect from each other when guys get to the top of the route and what's coming next. Let's move to the defensive side of the ball. Let's talk about the defensive line. We talked about Adam Gotsis here in the last day or so being released by the Jaguars. And when you look at this, it makes some sense because Devon Hamilton looking very, very good. A year ago, he was injured going into the season. It never really seemed to happen for him like the Jaguars would have hoped. Eric Armstead, you're obviously hoping for big things out of the acquisition previously at the San Francisco 49ers. He's had some injury issues the last couple of years. So the question's going to be, can you get 16, 17, 18 beyond sort of games out of Eric Armstead at this point in his career? Roy Robertson Harris, a proven guy in the rotation there to go along with Armstead. Jeremiah Ledbetter, very solid. We talked about Tyler Lacey earlier. You drafted Jordan Jefferson. Seze Otamiwo is a guy that we've seen get a lot of action with the ones and the twos. Talked about Mason Smith and his continued development. It's been impressive because, this is a guy, Ryan Nielsen talked about it too earlier today, that you watch him in just some of the even drill work and you realize he's still very much in the developmental stages of where he's at. And you know that a lot of that probably has to do with he lost essentially a calendar year of football at LSU because he was he was injured so early in that 2022 season and that season opener against Florida State in New Orleans. So he lost that entire fall of development in 2022. And with that kind of injury, you're not going to be really good to go for spring practice the following March and April. So very much a developmental guy, but he's showing you just some natural ability and some natural attributes that may make it tough to keep him off the field. Now, as we sit here right now, I look at Devon Hamilton, Eric Armstead, Roy Robertson Harris, maybe even Tyler Lacey and Otamiwo and Ledbetter, and think they're ahead. But Mason Smith, I think, based on where he looked to be from the first day or two of camp to where he is now, it's going to maybe make it tough. Now, in this defense, a year ago, you would consider Josh Hines-Allen and Trayvon Walker outside linebackers. They're listed as defensive ends in Nielsen's defense. Depth is something you wonder about a little bit here. I thought Travis Gibson today showed some good stuff against the run, working in support of Hines-Allen and Trayvon Walker. Deshaun Dixon, unfortunately, injured. So it's going to really fall to guys like DJ Coleman that now have a great opportunity. Miles Cole was a late round pick in 2024. So we'll see how those guys continue to develop and how the numbers shake out now. If you consider the defensive ends to be more of the defensive line group than a year ago when you had those edge guys listed with your linebackers that you kept. Inside backers, Mike and Will. Foyer, obviously, at the Mike. And then Devin Lloyd at the Will. You see Chad Muma listed with Lloyd. Lloyd's very much the guy off the ball to go along with Foyer on it. But Muma can play the Sam for sure. Yasser Abdullah also in that mix. But what we have seen is Muma next up inside. When Foyer or Lloyd goes out, we've seen Muma with one or the other at the inside linebacker position. When the Jags have been in their base, we've seen Chad Muma on the field with Lloyd and Foyer. So I'd say Chad Muma right now, very much a legit option there between three positions, because Mike and Will are usually interchangeable. If you can play Mike, you can play Will. Just the difference is one's going to be the green dot and the other isn't. Now there's some schematic differences in terms of what you're going to carry out in the Mike and the Will, but typically, whether it's at the high level of college football or certainly in the NFL, there's cross training there between the Mike and the Will. As far as depth goes, Ventrell Miller, can he stay healthy? Unfortunately for Ventrell, it's been a little bit more of the same going back to his days at Florida. Even in this camp, we've seen him with a bit of a leg issue. We've seen him most recently with the hand. Caleb Johnson's solid. Caleb Johnson, I don't know if he's ever going to be a starter in the National Football League, but he shows up nicely in just about every practice. And he's also a core special teams guy, a guy that you can put on any of your special teams units, and he's going to get the job done. Now, Tanner Muse was signed as camp got underway, of course, and that's kind of where he's got to try to make it work for him. Ty Summers in that same boat when you talk about linebacker depth as well. And then we get to the secondary, and it's extremely fascinating because consistently what we've seen back there is Tyson Campbell and Ronald Darby at the corners. We've seen Andre Sisco. Darnell Savage on this depth chart's listed as the first team free safety. Really haven't seen much of Darnell Savage at safety. What we've seen is Darnell Savage at the nickel corner. And Christian Braswell, who's listed as the first teamer on this depth chart, he's seen a lot of reps with those ones as well. But it's been Sisco, and before Wingard was injured, it was Wingard and Sisco at the safeties, Savage at the nickel corner, Darby and Campbell at the corners. Now, with Dewey out, it's been Antonio Johnson a good bit to go along with Andre Sisco, still playing Darnell Savage at the slot to go along with those corners. We'll see what this addition here in the last day or so of Adrian Amos will do to all this potentially, because Amos is a guy who has legit experience in the National Football League. I know there's a hope that Wingard will make it back for the opener against Miami. My thinking on that is that I'm going to just be pleasantly surprised if he's actually able to go at a high level. The concern you have about the Dolphins, as much as anything, it's not just the athletic matchups, man. When you start getting into Jalen Waddle and you get into Tyreek and all those weapons now that Tua Tagovailoa has around him, and that offensive staff has an entire offseason to scheme up for you as well. You got to be fundamentally sound on the back end. You cannot bust. It's already going to be hard enough when you're where you're supposed to be, when you're supposed to be there. What you can't do is just give the Dolphins layups. And that's where I think Wingard, there was more of a sense of security that if nothing else, he was going to be where he was supposed to be. Antonio Johnson has got to prove that he's capable of that on a consistent basis. And that goes for all these safeties really back here. But in terms of what we've seen after Wingard went out, it's been more Cisco and Johnson at the safeties, Savage at the nickel corner, Darby, Tyson Campbell at the cornerback spots. And boy, in terms of just making this roster, I think especially at corner, the competition is fierce. Amani Oruwariye to go along with Trey Flowers. Trey Flowers listed at corner, but I've seen him a good bit at safety. In fact, what we saw, or I saw, went out there the last few days that they were inside, but more dime work. And we've seen Trey Flowers working some at the dime. That's something that obviously Darnell Savage can do as well. We saw Terrell Edmonds, a safety, working some at dime today. We saw Antonio Johnson working some at that dime position. So there's a lot of different ways that you can use these guys back here. Jarian Jones, I know you're going to ask about him, the rookie out of Florida State. Jarian is a guy that right now I wouldn't see as being on the field against the Dolphins in the opener, assuming the pieces that we talked about stay healthy through the remainder of preseason football. But I could definitely envision Jarian Jones middle of the season, second half of the season, proving difficult to keep out of the mix. But Braswell's been very impressive. I think people were a little surprised to see him there with the first team as the nickel corner. Again, I think that's been more Darnell Savage in actuality. But Braswell has worked a good bit with that first group, and he has been up to the challenge more often than not. I think even when you get to some guys like DeAndre Prince, you see him listed here as fifth at the one corner. It's not because that guy isn't a legit NFL talent. He's a young guy. There's other things that go into it. So when I see him fifth, and then I try to wrap my head around that with what I've seen from him on the practice field, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But he is a rookie, and there are things that rookies go through and the process that they have to navigate on a consistency basis, not just while you're out there for 2 hours. How do you go about your business every minute of the day? Maybe DeAndre Prince does that at an elite level already. I'm just saying in general, for a lot of rookies, that's part of the evaluation process that maybe takes a little more time than some other things. As far as specialists, yeah, Cam Little is the kicker. Logan Cook back as the holder and the punter. Ross Matisic back after an all-pro season as the long snapper. Cam Little's been excellent, man. Just an incredible story when you think about, as we've talked about many times, even going back to the draft, that this guy was a 3 and out at the college level. 20 years old, doesn't look to be 170 pounds with $100 of quarters in his pockets. But boy, just God-given ball striking ability, and should only get better. There's going to be some scar tissue. There's going to be some misses, and ultimately how he responds to those will define his career at this level. But you like having Logan Cook around him too, as a veteran, as a sounding board, as a sort of mentor in some ways. Logan Cook now 7-8 years in the league. I think he can be really good to have around Cam Little on a consistent basis. But by all accounts, Cam Little seems to have it together pretty solidly for such a young guy. The return situation's interesting because, again, Duvernay, Parker Washington, kind of similar, very similar in what they bring to the table. Duvernay in terms of sample size, what we know he can do as a return guy at this level, more tape, more documented success. The expectation is Washington can be that kind of guy too. And then on kickoff returns, Tank Bigsby, the backup running back there with Duvernay on what should be one of the bigger storylines really in the NFL is the change to the kickoffs and the kickoff return game, and the approach that teams are going to take. Are you just going to kick the ball out of the end zone and put it at the 30? Are you going to challenge teams, try to pin them inside the 30 with maybe some directional stuff, some squib kicks? That's stuff that's really, really unknown as we head into the true start of preseason football play here in the next few days. So there you go. Wanted to tie it in for you to the depth chart and also what we saw from Wednesday's practice. And with that, that's another edition of No Sleep Teal. We went deep today. Went deep on No Sleep Teal. We had some things to talk about. We hadn't joined you here in a couple of days. So hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, hit that like button for us. A little thumbs up. Turn on those notifications. Subscribe to the channel. Turn on the notifications. You'll get all these as they drop right here on Reier on YouTube. Going to be joined by co-host Evan Reier here in the coming days. We'll chop it up as it relates to the Jags' upcoming matchup with those Kansas City Chiefs. Wow. Star-studded in a lot of ways, the Kansas City Chiefs. And you want to talk about changes on the back end for this Jaguar defense, whether you see Patrick Mahomes or not, you got to think the Chiefs will present some things that'll help make you better in a lot of ways. Again, if you don't mind, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, turn on those notifications. It would help us out greatly. Travis Reier, thanking you once again for joining us right here on No Sleep Teal. And until next time, so long, everybody.